Hey guys, welcome back to this tutorial on Introduction to Python. In the last tutorial, we talked about how we can set up our environment. Now let's start programming. We can instruct our computer to perform a task as simple as arithmetic operations like 2 plus 3. We can also do a subtraction or multiplication or a subtraction, and we can also do a division. Now, we want our system, our computer, to perform these tasks, to add these numbers together, to perform all these arithmetic operations. So it will do this for us, but how can we see the results? We would use a print function. The print function is the most popular function in Python. What is a function? A function is a set of code that has been written to perform a particular task. It takes in an input that you give it and it performs a task on the input and it returns an output for you. In Python, we have two major types of functions. We have the inbuilt function and the custom function. The inbuilt function, they are functions that have been written already in Python library. So we have it available for us to use. But the custom function are the user-defined functions. They are the functions you define yourself. We'll talk about that much later. But for now, we'll be using the Python inbuilt function. So one of them that we're going to use is the print function, as I've said earlier. The print function, simply what it does is it takes in an input and then it prints it out in your terminal. It lets you see your results in your terminal. So here, if we want to see our result, we are going to simply write print, which is a function, and then we'll pass in our input in a bracket. That is how to initialize a function. So we are going to print all this out so that we can see our results in our terminal. So we write print. And then you run this cell to see the results. Now you can see we have 5, 6, -1, and 0.8, which corresponds to each of these lines. Now, can you think of what would happen if I do not add this print function to these lines? So let me print this now, and we can only see the results for the last line. So by default in Google Colab, the last line gets printed even if you don't indicate the print function. It must print out something for you, which is the last line. So all these other operations were successful, but we would not see it unless we indicate that we want to see the output. That is by using the print function. And these are numbers, and when we want to use the print functions, you only put them directly in the print function. Now let's look at a text, an example of a text. When you're working with text in Python, you have to put them in quotes. These quotes can be single quotes or double quotes. So when you print this, you would see Python is a programming language. It will print out the text for you. But for Python to know that this is a text, you have to put them in quotes. And text values are always called strings. Now, most of the time, you would be working with numbers. You'll be working with values that you may want to use over and over again. Let's say I want to perform a task on the number 100. I want to subtract it from a certain number and I want to do some arithmetic operations on it. It would be too stressful for me to start having to write 100 minus 2, 100 times 5. Having to write 100 over and over again when I want to use it is stressful. So instead of having to do this, we can just create a variable for the number 100. What is a variable? A variable is simply a container that holds a value. It's like your purse that you keep your money. So it's like it's a container that holds a particular value. So this value can now be a number, it can be a text, it can be list, it can be so many things which you would learn more about as we go through this course. But for now, let's just focus on the number and the text. So if you want to create a variable, there are some rules that you should follow. You don't just create a variable with anything. There are some rules that you should follow, otherwise you would get an error. The first rule is that the variable name must start with a letter or an underscore. So in this case, if I'm naming my variable A is equal to 100, this is valid because it follows the rule of creating variable. It can also be A, it can also be underscore A. I can also assign a value like this, underscore A. So if I print out A and I print out underscore A, I wouldn't get any error. Underscore. If I run this cell, I would get 100 and 200 for my A and underscore A respectively. So the third thing is that there are case. So a variable name cannot start with a number. A variable name cannot start with a number. If I create a third variable now, let me just replace this with, let's say, 2A, and I decide to print 2A. If I name my variable 2A, this will give me an error because a variable name cannot start with a number. So you see, it's saying syntax error, invalid, and it's pointing to where it is. One good thing about Python is it shows you your error and it points to the line where you have the error. So it makes debugging very much easier. So it's saying invalid syntax. So I cannot create a variable name that starts with a number. So when you're creating your variables, you take note of that. So also variables are case sensitive. Variable names are case sensitive. So I created a variable named lowercase a here, which is 100. I assigned the value 100 to it. I cannot call it as uppercase A. If I print out this, I will get an error of uppercase A not being defined. And as you can see here, okay, I still have my variable 2A. Let me just erase this. Now let's print A. So you see I have an error. Name A is not defined. Name A is not defined. So it is uppercase, it is case sensitive. So you cannot define a variable as a lowercase and then call it as an uppercase. So you have to call it exactly with the type of case that you define it with. Also, it can only contain alphanumeric characters and underscores. So your variable name cannot contain special characters like, let's say, A2. Of course, it can contain numbers, just that it should not start with that number. So let me say I'm creating I'm creating a variable A2 and I'm adding a special character like maybe art, and I say A2 art is equal to 300. I will definitely get an error because your variable name cannot contain a special character. It can only contain a number, a text, and underscore. So I would get an error while I'm trying to run this. So it's saying invalid syntax, and it's pointing to where I have the error. So I would have to erase this because this is not a valid variable name. So your variable can have alphabets, it can have numbers, and it can have underscores. It cannot contain a special character. It cannot start with a number. That's all about creating variables. We'll explore more on variables in the next tutorial. Thank you for listening, and do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel.